This is 180 milliseconds too late, the SSA Rocket League podcast. And one day I will start this podcast unmuted, but that day is not this day. We're going to be talking about SSA, as we always do, and how we get better. How do we catch up with the rest of the world? And I want to begin a series of conversations with people who have traveled the road of professional Rocket League to one extent or another, and kind of get their insight and thoughts about SSA and how we get ourselves, how we accelerate our progress going forward. And so to get this kicked off, my guest tonight is Nick Marrone, if you're Italian, or Nick Marrone if you're just English or American. And he's currently the coach of M80 in North America, but has also been he was coach for Queso, he was coach for the Falcons, and for the last 4 or so years has been quite extensively involved at the highest levels of competitive Rocket League as a coach. Was a player before that, so I've gotten him in to have a chat with us. So without further ado, Nick, good evening and welcome.
Very kind of me calling me a player nowadays. I was never good at this game.
I did look. I went and had a quick look at Wikipedia, and I was like, oh, okay. So he had some playing time, but yeah, got into the coaching. 2019, 2020?
I have no clue. I think it was 2020, maybe 21. Oh, God, I'm gonna have to look now. It was the start of RLCSX, man.
Do you want me to do? I can send you a link to your Wikipedia page if you want. That's.
I don't know when I don't know when RLCSX was. I think it was 2021.
That was 2020.
Yeah.
That was the year of COVID. We were all stuck at home.
Okay, yeah. It's almost 4 years doing this. Dear God.
Okay,
I'm getting old.
Please don't talk. Please, you're a long way from even starting to get old. You're doing just fine. Nick, I think let's out the gate. What I'd like to ask you is, could you describe your coaching philosophy? What is your philosophy around coaching that level of Rocket League, and how has that philosophy evolved over time, if that's not too complicated a question?
Yeah, no, I mean, when I first started coaching, to be honest, I was a very dumb 17-year-old. I didn't really know much. I had a few friends that wanted help with just communication and creating a team environment and little things like that. And my background, I come from football, so I played soccer pretty much my entire life. I started doing managing in soccer because, very similar to what happened in Rocket League, I realized I'm not good enough.
Okay.
And that's unfortunate. That's the realistic truth. So I wanted to still be involved in the scene, and I wanted to make esports my long-term goal and long-term career. So I did everything I could to stay in the scene. When I started, it was a lot more, okay, how do you focus on team environments? How do you focus on things like that? Eventually, I got better. I got really lucky with my first team with Democat, Skills, and Prime Thunder, so very much OGs. They've been around the scene. RLRS level players, I think maybe RLCS, I'm not sure. Prime was. But they taught me a lot about the game and how to think about the game, and just this idea that Rocket League is not just a mechanics-based game. And my entire philosophy has pretty much come down to, okay, what are we willing to gamble? Because I like teams that are aggressive, and I like this idea that you can dominate games and really try and force your ideology onto teams. But I've worked with a lot of teams, I've worked with a lot of organizations, and unfortunately that doesn't always line up. So it's kind of changed into doing whatever the org wants. Okay, if an organization has this goal of, we want to make lands, my goal is no longer to completely force my philosophy. It's an idea of, I need to make them happy. This is still my job at the end of the day. I can have my own ideas, I can have my own personality, but there also needs to be the realist in me that goes, I get fired if I don't achieve the goal. And it's the truth of it. So I think it's probably helped me become a more professional person, professional coach.
Okay.
But there is still a lot of learning for me. I mean, I'm turning 22 at the end of the month, so it's not like I'm the oldest around. I think I'm still the youngest coach by quite a bit, like in the top level scene. So I'm still figuring everything out. There's been times I've abandoned my philosophy and gone back to it and tried things that, okay, they haven't panned out, like very much similar to this last split. I've took a risk and unfortunately it didn't work out. And
Mm-hmm.
now I need to learn and understand why and just keep trying to grow as a person, grow as a coach, and do whatever is best for my players to get them over the line.
So if we then talk about M80, and I mean, you had sort of 5 to 8 finishes throughout the last split. In terms of the goals of your team and where you wanted to be, how did that measure up? I mean, you've kind of alluded to it already that you wanted to go somewhere or try a thing, it didn't quite work out. But how are you feeling about the performance overall?
I feel like I have to stomach a lot of responsibility, and it was very cruel that this is the first time I've truly had a team that very much believes in me, very much is willing to do my philosophy, and it worked out very, very well in situations where I think, to be honest, we were able to continue what we were doing under lower stress into higher stress environments.
Mm-hmm.
We would have probably been a top 2 team in North America, if not a top 4 team in the world, and genuinely competing for this major. I don't think we can really say our Swiss performance looked like we were that far off like a G2 or the world's best. I think we're the only team to beat Gen G, but there's also the part of me that goes, okay, you always hear it at lands, and you always hear it when the tournament starts to get later, the gameplay always gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, there's that element of I need to analyze, okay, why didn't we get over the line? Did I give them too many instructions? Is it just not able to be done yet? At the stage of tournaments, under these pressures, under the scrutiny, did I not teach it well enough? Did I not give them the time to truly adjust? Because also, like, we formed our team quite late. We didn't necessarily at the same time every team had, so it's even more risky for me to try and force that. And there's obviously times during the split that I could have gone, yeah, maybe we abandon the philosophy a bit, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe we get better, maybe we get worse, and it's just kind of having to live with it and accept it at this point. But yeah, obviously it's disappointing to miss the major. I think we were consistently inconsistent, to put it nicely,
Yeah.
because we were made every top 8. But
Yes. So does that mean then? But you're a settled roster in terms, and looking forward into Major 2. I mean,
oh yeah, yeah.
in many respects, this first split was kind of weird. The announcements were late. So everyone got to know very late what the format was, how it's all going to work, and it felt, well, certainly from an SSA perspective, because we had the additional weird region stuff happening. This whole split felt a little bit rushed and almost slapped together. But now that that's been done, and there's a little bit of a break now for until it starts up again. I mean, that's got to bode well in terms of you and how you and the team work, having some time to build up to the second major.
Yeah, exactly. And like we talked about it even when we first signed, it was we're committing for this for a year. Like I made it very clear because we were also under the idea when we built the team that it was going to be okay, you can have time to fly home, or maybe there's slightly bigger breaks. NASA will fly over for regionals, but obviously that didn't pan out like that. I think we had a conversation with his school right when the announcement dropped, which was 2 weeks before the first regional, of like, is it possible for him to go online, or like, what the hell do we do?
Yes.
Uh, so that was last second, but unfortunately, like, you just got to roll with the punches. Like, anything I say today is not going to change Blast's mind tomorrow, or
Sure.
hopefully maybe next season. But I see so many people commenting things like, "Oh, like maybe we can change it for next split and stuff like that." No,
No.
like this is a season thing,
Yeah, no,
and
it definitely feels like the season, the roller coaster for the season is going. There's no changing the track halfway through. It is what it is
exactly.
until the end of the season.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, I don't think many teams are gonna make roster moves. Like I've obviously heard a couple things about a couple teams, so it's probably not hard to figure out which one's based on results, right?
Yeah.
But there is that element of okay, like what we're doing is I think we're taking the next 2 weeks off where they've been in a foreign country for the last 6 weeks. Let them go home. Let them spend time with their family. Let them de stress, right? Because
Mm.
like I'm not gonna blow up a team and blow up every idea I have and change everything in a 1 week period, right? Like, I think people still see coaching as like, oh, just bump more, and it's like when I have to build a full, not necessarily build a full, like rotation or things like this, but okay, how do we actually interact in these types of situations? What are these things to look for? What does X cause Y, which causes Z? It doesn't just happen overnight, and obviously the thing people kind of forget with coaching is just because I fix one thing doesn't mean it doesn't create four new issues. Uh, so it's like, okay, what's your risk versus reward? And yeah, to be honest, I probably could have gone and changed things for the final regional. But there's also that element of, okay, we underperformed the first regional, and we probably played the best in that first regional. We should have won that series against Shopify in my eyes. If we played like we did the first two series, we lose our head. Okay, that is what it is. It's your first regional as a team. You still went 3-0. Next regional, hard underperformed against OG, and then the Game 7 loss to DSM. That was probably... We switched over from extremes where the first regional, we had my ideas, JC's ideas, and their ideas almost like mixed. And then it goes from one extreme to the other where we're almost not doing it as much as we should, to by the third regional we're doing it nearly every time, and then it's gone to the other extreme and it's still not good enough, which that's on me, and I necessarily probably didn't do as well as I should have, and okay. I can live with that. And unfortunately this has kind of been a thing in my career that the first split's always been quite cruel to me. But that's a life lesson I need to learn, and how to get better in those, of implementing philosophies and being, I guess, as ruthless as I tend to be in second and third splits when it's on the line and there's that pressure there, because I'm not a person that works well with no pressure. Okay. And unfortunately, like, start of the seasons, they don't have the same element of going, okay, this gets you to Worlds or not.
Yes. Okay. All right. So you were talking about rosters. You didn't, SSA pretty much after every split it's roster chaos. And I don't think, outside of Limitless, I'm not sure that any of the rosters stay together. So we still have to go through our madness there. And for me, that's symptomatic of where we are in terms of growing up to do and settling down and having a few more options, I think, in terms of players and that sort of thing. But we'll get there. So to introduce this subject, I actually I've got a Snowy tweeted last night, and I think, there we go. And I was surprised to see this tweet, because it indicated to me that Snowy was taking a bit of an interest in the broader SSA community, which is good, because he's a very single-minded person and doesn't get involved much in community type things. But he was curious to know who are the up-and-coming SSA players, and there have been lots of interaction on that tweet, and people suggesting players and so on. But what caught my interest relative to what I want to talk to you about, Nick, is in one of the responses, Snowy said, there needs to be someone who is young, talented, who wants it enough, and then actually puts in the work to get it. Only then will we see another great player. And why I think that's relevant from Snowy, Snowy and I have... there's much about the world that we see very differently, and we don't agree on a lot of things. But I will say this about Snowy. We have had 21 regional tournaments in the RLCS since we were included back in 2021. Snowy has been on the winning team in, I believe it is 17 of those 21 regional wins. So there's no doubt that he is an impactful player, and he is a guy that is absolutely single-minded about wanting to be the best he can be and to not lose. He hates losing anything. And that drive for me has been what I have perceived to be a key factor in whatever team he has been on, have been, for the most part, winners in the regional. And that has come at a bit of a social cost at times, because there are a lot of people in the community who are frustrated with Snowy and how he goes about his business and that sort of thing. But I think he takes the approach of he's here to win, not to make friends, and that's a fairly solid philosophy that is put into practice. But that then brings me to the topic here, is that while it is fantastic that we've had a team as good as Limitless and Orlando Pirates before that, who are winning the vast majority of the regional events, it has led to the perception, a not incorrect perception, that we are a one-team region. And my worry is that that team, I don't know how much longer Snowy's got. He's kind of alluded that maybe he retires at the end of the season. If things go well, he might stick around for another, but he's closer to the end of his career than the beginning. I worry about the pool we have coming behind people like Snowy and To Die For, who are going to kind of fill that gap. And I do think, so this very long-winded intro, Nick, my first question is, what is your perception of SSA in terms of the gap between Limitless and everybody else? And I acknowledge and recognize you're not an expert on SSA, and at best you followed it casually, but your thoughts in as much as you have thought about it.
When you say SSA, do you mean truly like local SSA talent?
Yes.
Okay. I think SSA and the entire young group of young generation of players is going to get better the minute they actually adopt the European teams playing in their region. Like that's where it comes from. If you want to be taught like how to play elite level Rocket League, I've watched a lot of SSA teams because I had an offer there once, and also just even preparing for this. It's very SSA right now is very outdated, and also it's like I compare it a lot with like a team like Mongols in CS, which is a Mongolian team. So yeah. Their region is very much similar to like an SSA, where there's no other good teams in Southeast Asia. There's no teams that have really come up. If there's any young players, they immediately poach them because, well, they're like the Limitless in the region. They don't lose. They don't miss majors. They're just there.
Yes.
Right? And what they've done to adopt their practice and philosophy was they just played European teams on 180 ping all day. And they just accepted it of like, okay, we're not going to be the best team, but the only way we're going to improve is realistically going, this region's not necessarily the place to improve. And until, I think it was like this last season or two, or last year or two, they're starting to get more quality Southeast Asian teams, because eventually it's like, okay, you play the top team so much, you're going to learn things, and they're going to learn things from scrimming all the EU teams constantly and going to these lands. And now they've gone to like probably like a lower top 16, top 20 team in the world in CS. And it's like a team from Mongolia in any esport is not what you think of, right? Like it's the same thing in Africa. Like you don't necessarily think like, oh, South Africa could be a powerhouse. But this new format has had the positive of you're getting better practice. You need to embrace it. And those younger players and older players, to be honest, as well, if they put aside the ego and go, let's scrim all the European teams we can, let's scrim all the Middle Eastern teams we can, let's just scrim people that are better than us and kind of go, okay, we want to defend the region. I get it. Is it wrong? 100%. Blast has completely bottled that. And I've said this for the last year or two. Having things like this is disgusting because it just encourages people to move over until the entire region gets better. And it also forces the region to do that as well. If you want to be competitive, you have to be good enough to beat these foreigners. But what am I going to do tomorrow to kick out the 7 European teams that are making the regionals? Nothing. You just have to beat them. And it's like, the truth is, a lot of those European teams are better than the teams in the 4 through, probably even 2 through, like, I don't know, 10 range. Because I assume it's a lot of the teams in, like, the 8 and under that have just been pushed out of regionals, and then, like, the 4 through 6 have been pushed out of top 8s and money. I don't know enough about the region, but from everything I've seen tweeted, it doesn't seem like SSA teams have welcomed them or scrimmed against them or tried to actually benefit off them being there. And trust me, I'm not saying like, oh yeah, embrace the cheaters. Like, cheating is wrong at the element. But when that team was playing it in Europe, and to be fair, they were arrogant and egotistical, but they're still kicking everyone's ass except Limitless. Like, that should be the team everyone goes, yeah, you know what? Fair enough. I'm gonna have to play you in a semifinal or a quarterfinal at some point. Might as well just scrim you and constantly scrim you guys and just get better. And Limitless should be the same thing of just scrimming any European bubble team they can and get that experience. That's like, okay, maybe a like a Caliente, which I don't know if they would, but just a team in that like 24 to 32 range.
Mm. Well, I
Get
think,
that. Like,
yeah, you know what? So much is, I mean, the whole topic has been talked to death, and the whole cheating scandal aside, it is. I've gone back and forth on absolutely hating it to going, okay, there's a lot of positive, and I do think that this has been the biggest catalyst we've had to improve locally than we've ever had.
yeah,
So Limitless have been at the top, and that's almost acted as in a weird way, it's kind of a deterrent because everyone goes, okay, well, Limitless will make the major, and I just want to make top 4, maybe come second, maybe top 8, get a few $100s, and we're okay. Whereas now, I do think there's a bit more impetus to perhaps the players in the 2 to 10, 2 to 12 range to go, okay, how do we get better? And from my perspective, and I've got to say this cautiously, is that I don't know that we're seeing a lot of that. There are players that stand out. There's a guy named Heatsy on Owned, and he in my interactions with him and from what I've seen, he's become single-minded. He just wants to be better, and he wants to do whatever he can be to do better. And I think there's, at the risk of, I feel like I'm going a little bit all over the place, but what I'm coming back to is I wonder, I agree with you 100% of what you're saying is get involved, scrim every EU team you can, get in there, play on EU servers, or if they're planning to play here, play them here, whatever the case is, just play teams that are better than you. That is the best way to get better. But is there, it feels to me like there's a mental jump that needs to be made by our local up-and-coming talent. Like they've got to think differently about how they approach it if they want to be the best in this game.
no, for sure. Like, the first thing that comes to my mind was when I was kicked from Queso. I obviously then joined Dig after, right? But the team I was trying out with was Veloce, I think at the time, which was SMW, Twiz, and Senzo. So at that time, Falcons hadn't lost ever, right? But it was the main thing with them was implementing a mindset of, to put it nicely, fuck Falcons. Like our goal here is to knock them off. Like I think I joined. We were third in points. I did one regional with them. We got to second, which was also the world's bid at the time, so that was huge. But it was the first time Falcons had sweat because I think we took them to 6 games. It was all 1-goal games. It was we had that mindset of no, like this is it. This team is not better than you. You can take them in scrims. Put the mindset in of we need to get a result. It's no longer acceptable to just be mediocre. And I think there's a lot of SSA teams that like just kind of show up and look of like, okay, let's game for second or fourth. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like the region is not good enough at this point that you can just completely go like, yeah, we're just gonna lose. If K Corp said, you know what, we're going down to SSA, all right, you can accept being second, fourth, or whatever. If like it, to be honest, even like probably like a mid-level European or North American team, I get it. Limitless, I don't. It's weird because I think Valiant almost looked better at Worlds, in my eyes, from watching them. But
yeah,
like at least how they looked against PWR, because they just looked hard to beat. They just looked miserable. Like it was obviously like they bottled it because they didn't have the experience, right?
Yes.
Like, and that's just it is what it is, right? But I watched that series against PWR back, like even recently. I was like, damn, they were hard to beat. Like they made themselves miserable. And for some reason, I feel like there's a lot of SSA teams, and I don't watch the region, so maybe I'm wrong on this.
yes,
They don't make it just miserable for Limitless. Like if you bring a knife to a gunfight, you get shot. If you try and play normal Rocket League against a team that's better than you, you get shot. So, a lot of these lower teams should just focus on how can we make this game miserable for them? How can we even try and cause an upset? Is it going to be just play purely psychotic Rocket League that you're hyper aggressive and you just try and make them uncomfortable? Go for it. You just want to sit in net and figure out your defense and say, okay, their offense really isn't that good. Like, there obviously is a level of some teams are better, some teams are worse. But Limitless is not necessarily breaking down offenses at an international level, so therefore it's not that great. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
they would you can figure that out how to play against them. But when you start trying to just play like, oh, we'll just play and whatever happens happens, like you'll lose because they
Mm.
are still better than you. But like when I think about with Dig, right? We weren't good in it. We shouldn't have been that fifth seed on paper, right?
Okay.
But we were miserable to play against. Like, like I remember against SSG, we just wouldn't attack. Like we would just hold the ball and say, "Okay, challenge us," and then take 50s back. And it's like, and we would sit in net. And because our press was so bad in the final third, our logic of how we press was everyone go all the way back. We get boost if we score on the first attack, we score on the first attack, and if not, all they're going to do is run the same solo plays and the exact same offense that we've studied 10 times. Okay, this is how you defend against it. Okay. Twice a series, Daniel's going to peak and score a wonder goal. Happens. But I know they're going to overcommit 5 more times. So, we'll score off those. Who cares? I don't need to play beautiful Rocket League. I need to make their lives hard. I need to win.
Interesting.
It's just that mindset of like
Yeah.
we can win. They're not that great.
Okay. Well, then so I've had this idea now, and it's something I'm wanting to push, and there's a couple of people who've kind of taken up the challenge. Is there are weird issues around, EU teams don't necessarily want to come here and scrim SSA teams unless it's limitless
For sure.
or that sort of thing. So we have those issues. Everybody egos everybody. I get that. And then we were talking before we started in terms of what your rate is as a coach, and there isn't a team and there isn't an org in SSA that could afford to pay you as a coach. We're just not mature enough. We don't have the money. We don't have the infrastructure for it just yet. But in the meantime, also though, I think like. Having you come and coach a bunch of 14-year-olds is probably going to be bringing a gun to a knife fight where it's a little bit of overkill. So the thought I've had is there are a number of European players, people who are good, people who do low-level coaching, mid-level coaching, people who can coach, and I've thought, well, why don't we invite those sorts of people to come and pick up 2 SSA players, get into the next split, join the regionals, and just work with 2 local players and work on their game, work on their mindset, work on how they approach the game. And my thought is if we can get like 10 of those sorts of guys, that takes care of like 20 local players, and maybe over the course of a split and the off season or whatever, we raise them a level or 2, which gets us a little bit closer. I don't know from your point of view if that idea has merit.
No, it makes sense. But my big thing, like I've said this even in NA a lot, like it's not going to happen over a split. Like you need it
Of
over
course.
like a generation of players. Like if you have a good young generation coming in, that's awesome. But the issue is, if your entire generation looks up to Limitless, yes, they're the best in the national, but they're not good international. So you're kind of have that same issue you're talking about where they learn bad habits. And to be honest, in NA, this was my big thing was, okay, if you have every single team learning from SSG and NRG, you are going to have a bad region because those teams did not challenge the ball and they did not pass. They sat in net. And now in NA, you have a bunch of teams that finally it's changing this season, but why did they fail at the international level last season? None of them knew how to play aggressive, none of them knew how to pass, none of them knew how to play offense, and they would just sit on defense, and eventually offense has gotten good enough that counterattacking just doesn't work well enough anymore. So, and obviously that's kind of different as well because the one thing I was saying is African teams should probably sit in that and make it as difficult as possible and make it struggle, but that's when there's that talent gap. If there's not that much of a talent gap, man, like you kind of have to build it into players of, okay, this is how we're playing, from the ground up and build that in of like having those players to idolize, which like I don't know much, but I would kind of guess a lot of players idolize Snowy here, and kind of he's come up through ones. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them have also tried to idolize that one style, but also I may be wrong in that. But to me, that would be my assumption.
Mm. Well, yes and no. I think
Okay.
everybody really. Snowy's an interesting character, but everyone will agree that he's done something right. And if you go back far enough, I mean, he hasn't done ones for a couple of years, well, since the start of RLCS, really. But
Yeah.
that is where he honed his game. I mean, he's a guy who has genuinely made SSL in ones on 180 ping.
Yeah. And that's why he's the most successful, because he was willing to deal with that, you
Mm.
know? So it's like, I remember I was talking to Zebra in Dallas? Yeah, that's where,
Yes,
or Fort Worth, wherever that Worlds was.
yes.
And he was like, yeah, like me and him went over to England and we just grinded. To be honest, if a lot of African players could do that, or even go to like somewhere in the Middle East and grind on Middle Eastern and European servers, you're going to improve 10 times faster. And that's where it just goes to. Coaching is incredibly helpful, but there's that element of you can only coach so much against weaker competition. And
Mm.
like I think, to be honest, I think Falcons is going to have this issue coming into this major if they're not consistently scrimming EU teams as well. If your region sucks, it doesn't make for great improvement because you're like, oh, let's try something, and it's like, yeah, it'll work because you're just better, and it doesn't really work.
So are you? Are you? Would you advocate for? Uh, and I know the limit. Well, most SSA players at a certain level aren't playing the SA servers. They are grinding on EU servers.
Yeah,
Is that where the work should be happening? I mean, you advocating for that?
totally. Yeah, like there's no point of playing in your own region. Like all the South Americans play in NA, all the Middle Eastern players play in EU. Hell, even like the Asian players, they play on NA West because it's just better. They deal with the 180 ping. You have to deal with that, and it's
Mm.
like when those teams do come over and play in your region, yeah, it sucks because it's like, okay, you are taking spots away from players in the probably 4 to 10 region potentially making money, and there's probably kids in there as well that's like, oh, I can finally prove to my parents that yeah, I am making money in this game. Maybe it's potential career. But I mean, that's how I got started. Was I won like a local land. My mom was like, okay, you can make money off this.
Yes.
And it's little stuff like that. Like there is that element that the way they've changed it is good. Or I guess now, wait, SSA gets paid through like top 64 now. I was still
No,
thinking of last season.
top 32.
Top 32.
And it used to be just top 8, so it's a
Yeah,
full-time increase for us here. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I was thinking of when you were saying when I was saying like only the top 8 get paid.
yeah,
I forgot they changed it this season.
yeah.
This season has had so many damn changes. Uh, but yeah, like it's good. It is good to get this practice, especially now that it's not all or nothing anymore. Like
Yes.
this is good. This is how you're going to improve. And unfortunately, like they should be studying the insane amount of tape that they're getting against these teams and just saying, okay, what do they do better than me? And putting that ego aside of being like, oh, we're defending the region, which is great and it's a great narrative, and it really sucks that unfortunately no one really knows how to push that narrative that this should have been a thing anyway of like, oh, YMC versus Limitless, like
Mm.
they're defending the region, but instead it just comes into, oh yeah, Limitless won the regional.
Yeah.
And like there's so many storylines that could actually get SSA involved, and once you get those storylines, then you get orgs, and then you get financial incentives,
Mm.
and then you can put more time and commitment to the game. And there's also that element. Like I was listening to a Richard Lewis podcast the other day, and he was talking about like the OG NIP core in CS, where they push the game like hell to the local community. Where they were at local lands, they were pushing the game as much as they possibly could on social media. They were doing unreal amounts of content just to get the actual public in their region, which was Sweden, but also overall interested in that game because CS sucked at the start. And I
Yeah.
don't see
If
that.
y'all
Like,
don't follow
you have to
Graybeard,
make the
you need to get
entire
in it.
region better. Whereas it almost seems like when I read Twitter, I'm almost pushed away from the region because of how over the top, like people complain and make these dramas. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, like, yeah, you can't keep complaining about the situation. It doesn't change anything.
Yes.
It is what it is at this point. Embrace it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we are, uh, and I mean, it's got to the point I'm just tired of talking about it. It's let's deal with what we've got right now, and be better, and that in large measure, Nick, is why I've asked you to come here, because I mean, you've been involved with the scene for long enough where you've kind of seen it evolve and change, and there's been great changes and poor changes, but in and amongst all of it, the game has evolved tremendously. I mean, when you watch the level of play right now, I mean, it just blows the mind, even from 4 years ago through RLCSX. And
if y'all don't follow Graybeard,
think,
you need to get in there.
And now just the encouragement has got to be, we just need to get better. And if you are in a team that's below the SSA top 4, you've got to, and you want to be in the top 2. You want to overcome Limitless. You want to make it to Elan at some point. There's got to be a change in how you approach it, and there's a mindset, an attitude, and a little bit of suppressing one's own ego to just learn and become better. Because being good in SSA is just that. You're going to be good here.
Yeah.
But if you want to be good globally, there is a massive jump to be made.
Yeah, and the one thing that I noticed, like the few times I have watched SSA, is I see a lot of the same names every season, and I don't know if that's just I picked those matchups, right? But like, has there really been that many players that have like come through? Like, to die for, I've known since it started. Snowy, obviously, I've known. Sweaty, Clarence. I assume this is Sweaty Clarence,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, obviously, like I knew him from last season, but I feel like a lot of them. Has there really been that young talent that has come through?
Not enough. I mean, if we look at it now, there's Sweaty. I think we can probably. He's a guy that's kind of broken through. He's been around a while, but in the last 2 seasons, he's kind of got to the point where he's now sort of international ready. Guns is on his way up. Snoozy's on his way up. And then there's others there and thereabout. But your point is absolutely well made. There are not enough new names.
And like, I guess the other logic is, why aren't the older players teaming with them? Like, why is like a Skill Steel, Wilo, and Cams, like, why are they not just grabbing any young player they can and being like, all right, let's give ourselves a shot here? Or then that's because, like, I remember Wilo's on Valiant, and I want to say Cams and Skill Steel, those were Pirates, right? But I think that was 2 seasons ago.
Skill Steel was Pirates, Cams was Bravado, which is now in Mina. But that was. But yeah, Cam's another veteran.
Yeah, and it's like, why recycle the same talent? Like, if you guys have any young talent coming through, just push them to the top. Like, anyone that's mechanically as good as Limitless, just get them all together. Just try and create these, like, super teams, because I know single elim brackets make it tough when there's such a dominant 1 or 2 teams, but from what I look at the brackets, like, it seems like a lot of teams will just bounce from, like, 4th to 12th to 4th to, like, 11th, and it's like, obviously there is some talent there. Just get the best of the best together. Screw any friendships. Like, OCE has the same problem, man. Where, like, I've talked to them, I've been like, why are the 3 best OCE players not teaming? They're all like, yeah, we hate each other. And I'm like, who cares? Who cares? You don't need to be friends to be good.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to be friends to be good at all. Like, I've had teammates I've absolutely despised. And guess what? If we make LAN, you get over it. If you get a result, you get over it. And if you don't get over it, you make a roster move. Who cares? Not every team works out. Not every team's for the long term. But until there's a team that beats Limitless, it's just going to be the same thing of like, okay, well, we're just playing for the same prize money.
Yeah, and I think the danger becomes that no team beats Limitless, and Snowy retires. And then that puts them on a par with everybody else, and then it's almost the common denominator sinks a little, rather than everyone having risen to the occasion. We're actually a notch lower than we should be.
Exactly. And it just comes down to like, okay, can you actually build rosters? Just like get the best of the best, and let's take down this team, man. Like, and take down the Europeans. But there should be that almost like sense of national pride of like, hell yeah, I want to defend the region. Like, I want to create something here. And obviously, like you said, you want to being the best in SSA doesn't mean much at an international level, but there's also that element of like you get to represent your region. Like, imagine being the only good player from South Africa. I say only good player. The only international competing team or player from South Africa. That's huge. Or you see in other esports, there's one or two teams that are like, they represent the entire region. Like, Renegades was it for a long time with CS, where they were the only Australian core that could actually do things at an international level. Mongols, where I said with CS as well, they're the only Southeast Asian team that can do something at an international level. It's just little things that just give the entire region belief, where it's like, oh my god, like, there are people like me that can actually get a result. And it's just a completely different mindset. But unfortunately, you're not going to have that when the team you send every time goes 0-9.
Yeah.
Like, there's also a mindset change of, okay, from what I can tell, APAC and SSA is not that far away from OCE.
Right.
Granted, they are far from PWR. That I think I also rated PWR really high coming into Worlds. I think they work extremely well. I think they put a crazy amount of grind in. That is probably one of the most adapted, like, super minor region teams in my eyes. But there also comes the element you shouldn't celebrate getting one win. You should have the level of like, okay, if we need to compete at this level, the goal should not be just to knock off the other SSA team in wildcard or take one game against an OCE team. It needs to be a mindset of like, we're going to make these teams difficult and like we need to win these series because that's how you improve as a region. Getting one game doesn't mean much. Yeah, funnily enough, I had this conversation with Jack and Andy where we were talking about young whippersnappers where they went 2-3, and the one argument was, well, yeah, but they didn't make it out of Swiss, so it's not that great. And Jack was like, man, but getting one series against like a team like NRG is so huge for their mental, or even getting a couple of games. It just takes one win, and Africa, it's not necessarily put them in their spots to actually get those wins in my eyes. Like, they haven't done as much as they probably could have. And it's like, man, like when they go to LANs, they should be scrimming literally any team they can get their hands on, even if it's not at the LAN. Like, just bubble teams, get practice. And when teams come over to Europe for LANs, oh, all those other bubble teams or anything, practice. That's the only way you'll get better. It's just the true fact of it.
All right. Well, a real factor we do deal with as well is infrastructure, because our infrastructure is kind of weird here. You know, we talk about Limitless as a team. They're represented by an American org that's putting American money in, which is huge. It's fantastic for them, and it's overall good for the region. But beyond that, we don't have orgs with that kind of infrastructure and backing and money to make those things possible. So again, no point complaining about it. This is what it is. Despite all of the problems, there are 15, 16, 17-year-olds who want to be top-level players, who want to have a crack at representing the region at a LAN, who want to go and play over. So for that guy, what is their path forward? What should they be thinking about? How should they be proceeding forward?
First things first, with like the American money and Limitless, you also need to be able to grow your region and make the content around it. And as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong on this, you are the only content creator in South Africa. And I don't necessarily...
Yeah. It's a huge lament, Nick. You're quite right. There's certainly not enough, and certainly not by pro players. Carry on.
And it's like, even the organizations, I don't see shit. Like, I think Noxus is a Twitch or TikTok streamer or something, but like, no one cares about coaches anyway. Let's keep it real. No one cares about a coach's content. There's the unfortunate part of it. But if the only thing you can ever talk about the region, like, it's not a good thing if the biggest thing from this entire region is a cheating scandal.
Yes.
Like, that's not how you want to brand your region. No. But the orgs that are there, like, man, there's no content. There's nothing to push it. There's nothing that creates anything that makes orgs invest, because once orgs invest, boom, then you have a little bit more money, a little bit more free time, the ability to actually focus on your craft, right? And make yourself pro. But if you're a young player trying to go pro, honestly, just focus on individual talent. Like at this point, like in an underdeveloped region, if you are the best player, you do just win. Like I think of Nupo and Mina, and Mina, arguably not arguably, Mina was a much stronger region even when he came in.
Mm.
I think it was RLCS 21, 22, I think. He came in, he showed up, and he made a grand final, and he beat Falcons just because he was the best player mechanically in the region. And then he got banned for a year because he played underage. But you know, it happens to the best of us, right? But it's this idea of like, man, if you're a region with like 1, 2 good players, like realistically, like if you are that individually talented, you will just win in SSA. You'll just win in APAC. You'll just win in maybe not OC because of PWR, but you'll force yourself into a major spot. Same thing with Rule 1. Nupo is just the best player in the region. Is their team very good? No. Is there enough talent to compete with them? No. So they're always going to be at LAN. And it's like you don't need to focus on team stuff, to be honest. Like you can make a really easy strat book pretty much of like, okay, how do we play against certain teams? Well, we're just gonna keep the ball and just sit behind it every time. Like I watched that told you I was watching Pioneers versus Limitless. It's just like it's so obvious that there's not necessarily replays being watched because the ball just gets thrown away so much. Like if you're not mechanically good enough to go against these teams, don't make it a mechanical game. Like it sounds so simple, but it's like those little things of like make yourselves hard to play against. Actually develop, because once you make yourselves hard to play against, right, and you're not just a walkover, then teams will actually start trying different things against you, and then you're going to improve even more. Like I think of an example, like our first drawn wild card was Elevate when I was with Falcons. Elevate is not a team most people coming into that like Swiss had going very far. Like probably a 1-3, 0-3 team, right? Just get battered by everyone that isn't SSA or APAC. I watched them and like I made it very clear to my guys, these guys are going to be miserable to play against because they just sit in net and sit behind the ball. And it's like they're just their version of offense is they're gonna solo play and then go all the way back and they're gonna give space and you're gonna have to break down 3 men every single time. Enjoy. And they don't overcommit. They're disciplined. They worked very hard. We obviously did beat them. I think it was a 4-0, but also you could tell they made themselves difficult to beat, and then they beat. Who did they beat? It was G1 and Pioneers, right? I think it was Pioneers to go 2-3.
God, I can't remember.
I think that's what it was.
Yes.
But they beat. Obviously, they had that historic game against G1, and then they beat. I think it was Pioneers because they made themselves difficult to play against, and it just comes down to, okay, if you prepare well and you have the individual talent, you can do enough. You can do enough, right? And now, when teams play Elevate this season, and it's funny because now they didn't make the LAN, because also it's starting to not become a one-team region anymore because they're having their young talents come through, and then they just throw them all at the top and they say, oh, you're mechanically good enough? Good luck. You'll do it. They win. They win.
Yeah.
Like,
Wow.
once you're at the international level, like, yeah, there's a lot more tactics into it. Or once you're in a region like EU and NA, yeah, because there's, instead of 2 or 3 godlike players, there's 10, 10 or 15, right? And there's all that element of like, okay, we can execute, and if you just sit in net, we're gonna execute against you. The low teams from OCE, APAC, and SSA aren't going to. They're just not. Like, they're not going to break down these teams very well because they haven't had the experience. And it's just little things like that. Like, do they prepare as well as they should? Have they learned how to prepare? And maybe they haven't. And, like, I know, for example, what we've done in NA. Like, I hope I can say this. Like, I've worked with a lot of young players in this off season where I've been like, hey, let's go over replays. Like, let's, like, obviously I'm not thinking about picking them up now, but 2-3 years down the line, maybe. Or Sathyu's done it, and other coaches have done it, because that's how you build a region.
Okay, cool. All right, I've just seen here. Sorry, Nick, I'm looking over. I thought. So
You got first touch?
I was first touch, and I see they're live. I thought they were only going live at 9, but I think I might be on a little earlier than I thought, so now I'm starting to panic. And I'm getting notifications in the Discord that I'm supposed to be in Ninja and all of that, so I probably need to go and attend to that. But I think what you have said is incredibly important, and what I'm sort of distilling from everything you've said is you can be, given the size of SSA, it can be big. You can be good in this region, but it's going to take. You've got to work on your own individual improvement, and Rocket League is fantastic because you do improve. It's time, effort over time. If you put in the effort, you do get better, but it has to be grinded, and grinded with some purpose. Play the EU servers, play people better than you at every opportunity you can, get smashed and get better through doing that. And to help with that, I do want to invite coaches, players, if you want to come in and help the region, come pick up a couple of players and help them along, help them on their grind, point them in the right direction to make them better, and let's make this a region of multiple teams so that it does come down to the wire as to who we're sending to a LAN. So that's kind of what I've distilled from what you've said, Nick.
Exactly, man. Okay. It's just embracing the challenge, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, and the situation is the situation. Let's make it work for us, and I do think we can make it work for us by sort of using them to get better, by playing them and getting them to help and assist us. All right, cool. Well, I think that is pretty much going to wrap that up. Nick, I know I think we spoke about you coming onto this podcast. I think we met at a LAN somewhere. I'm thinking it might have been. Was it Rotterdam? Yes. So it was Rotterdam. So that's a year and a bit ago. So it's taken us a long time, but here you are. and I've always enjoyed our conversations and your openness and willingness to engage these topics. And when I asked if you'd come on the podcast, you were like instantly like, absolutely, I'm there. So I appreciate that very much. So thank you for that.
Appreciate the other perspectives, brother. We'll have to do it again sometime.
I have no doubt we will. All right, cool. So, all right. So we're going to go wrap. That's going to wrap it up for us. I am going to be on First Touch. I think probably in about an hour, rather than. It's going to be relatively soon. I'll keep you posted somewhere, but they're live now, so you can go and check it out. Nick, thank you very much, and everybody who came to hang and followed and in the chat, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much. But that's going to wrap it up from us. Until next time. Peace.
All right, that was fun, brother.
1 second.